Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Today we're back in War Thunder looking and giving thoughts on something that Gaijin have just implemented, the quantitative restrictions, basically changing the matchmaking at higher levels in the game, which I think was desperately needed, especially in ground vehicles. But the way they've done it reminds me of the way that World of Tanks slightly kind of does it, where basically in a game in World of Tanks, or at least this is how it used to work when I played, which was, well, at least a year ago now. Basically, you may have three tiers of tanks, so you have tier 3, 4, and 5, let's say, or 5, 6, and 7, but the amount of each tank and each type of tank on each team would be basically the same. So if you had two tier 7 heavies on one team, you would probably have two tier 7 heavies on the other, or you would have three tier 7 mediums to try and make up the gap. It was a very, very intense matchmaking system, and I think it was probably the best matchmaking system I've ever seen when it's come to games like it. Now, War Thunder, in the higher tiers, has had issues. I wouldn't say too much in air vehicles, apart from certain aircraft, such as the top echelon of them, such as there's C-13 and stuff like that. But in ground vehicles, there is a massive issue with the whole thing. And this is basically a way to try and a way to try and help it. So basically, quantitative restrictions, the gist of it, I'll link the Devblog below, but basically they've implemented it last patch. And the gist of it is that if you have a top tier in the game, which is above 7.0. So let's say it's 7.7. Then you will have a certain number of tanks on each team which are at 7.7 and no more and no less. So if you have 4 on this team, you'll have 4 on the other. If you have maybe 6 on this team, you'll have 6 on the other. Now they have basically made some calculations and said this is the example they give. With the participating vehicles with a minimum BR of 6.7 and a maximum BR of 7.7, the number of ground vehicles with a BR of 7.7 will be limited to 25% of all team members. So the 4 top vehicles of the 16 players will be at the BR of 7.7, or the average BR of 7.7. That means you only have 2 on each team out of the 8, which will be at 7.7. So basically, it's trying to balance them out by their BR, which, with a system of battle ratings and stuff like that, you've kind of got to do that. The other example they give is in battles where the participating vehicles have a minimum BR of 7.0 and a maximum BR of 7.7, the number of vehicles with a BR of 7.7 will be limited to 35% from all team members. So 6 top vehicles in the team with 16 players. So basically 3 of your team will be at 7.7, where the rest of the team will be lower. So I think this is a positive change. I still think there are issues with it, which I'll get into, but first of all, the positives. It's nice to see some balancing by number. Now, I know I've harped on about in the past how it doesn't really matter if you try and do it like this, because you'll still have teams of full tanks which are just significantly better than your own, like if you have a full team of Tiger 2s against a full team of your Pershings. Unfortunately, that's still going to happen because this is balanced by BR instead of balanced by number of vehicles. I think that needs to be implemented at some point, but that's a hell of a lot of calculations and estimations to do, and a lot of work. But this is a system which seems to me to be the best for the moment, because it's similar to that old system that I really enjoyed in World of Tanks. Now this is only the first step, of course, towards maybe moving it out across all of the BRs, since this is only 7.0 and upwards, but it also includes 6.7, so basically this system can only work from 7.0 and upwards. So if you have a bunch of, I don't know, 6.0 tanks and you're at the lowest BR in your 6.0 tank, and there's 7.0s on the enemy team, then only 25% of the enemy team will be at 7.0. So that means 2 of their tanks or their average BR will be at 7.0. I believe they're doing average BR of all vehicles in realistic. Or maybe maximum BR. I hope it's maximum BR. But anyway, that means only 2 tanks on the enemy team can be at 7.0. So that means that you only have 2 to kill compared to basically a whole team to kill, which has been happening before. I mean, the classic example I always use, which is always, it's a fail-safe example, is when I drive my Pershing, and I never come up against anything that is my BR, because it's unfortunately one of those tanks which is stuck between 2 BRs. And there's a reason why it isn't at the top BR, like the 7.0, the 7.3, the 7.7, because it's not good enough. But there's a reason why it's not at 6.0 either, because it would be too good. And it's just an awkward tank when it comes down to it. But because of this new system, it basically means I'm not going to be facing stuff like leopards and mouses, which is quite nice. Because in the old system, in these higher tiers, I would face quite a lot of 8.0 vehicles. A lot of leopards would turn up on my doorstep, even though my highest BR is at 6.7. Now, the reason why the range that they're using is from 6.7 to 7.7, I believe? Yes, 6.7 to 7.7, and this is also air vehicles as well. But the reason they're not including 8.0 into this, this is the answer that they're given. So because matchmaking for BR 8.0 is possible for BR 8... Oh, sorry, that's silly. To be quite honest, the only reason why I think they would do this and not include BR 8.0 is for one of the Q&A questions they have. So one of them says, I have aircraft with a BR of 8.0 and higher and ground vehicles with a BR 7.7. What will happen? So in this case, matchmaking will work as normal, and will select the BR spread for possible opponents between 7.0 and 8.0. This to me is still worrying. I don't understand why in this new system they've only gone from like 6.7 to 7.7, or 7.0 to 7.7, because 8.0 is still a big issue. I think the only reason they've said they're doing it from, that range, not including 8.0, is basically, wait, let's just read this. Yeah, with it's really annoying because half the sentence says something and the other one has typos in it. Some of these devblogs need to be spell checked, definitely, or just look for discrepancies in them, because there's a lot of words repeated in a hell of a lot of them. Now, with 8.0, I'm still not sure what's going to happen with this, because basically their justification is 8.0 you can only go down. 8.0 is the highest BR, so your spread will be from 7.0 to 8.0. Now, does that mean that if you're in a 7.0 vehicle, there should only be 2 8.0s on the other team? Or does the matchmaking still work for them? Because lower down, it says that the new rules will be applied only for battles of higher ranks with a BR spread between 6.7, 7.7, and 7.0 and 7.7. So that doesn't include 8.0. And I want to know what they do with 8.0, because I've got a feeling if this is a success and they see it as working, 8.0 is just they're going to put a fence between 7.7 and 8.0. So only 8.0 vehicles face 8.0 vehicles, which is how it kind of should be anyway when you look at what is at 8.0 nowadays and what is at 7.7 and 7.3. There's a hell of a lot of tanks which completely outmatch everything below them because of the way that they've done the timescale. But anyway, I think overall it's a positive change. There is also a Q&A section, and a lot of people are asking about lower BR vehicles. So one of them's talking about, what about if I have a BR 5.7 and it's matched against a 6.7. And at this moment, they've said that it's not going to matter. Like, this system only works 6.7 to 7.7 and upwards, except 8.0. So if you have a BR 5.7 vehicle, then it's, the rules do not apply. But I'm guessing, once again, with that 8.0 thought that I have, I think they're going to implement it in lower brackets as well, because why not? It makes sense. Nobody wants to face a full team of Tigers when you're in a the first Sherman 76. And that's what's happening right now. Same with the Tiger 2s or the IS 2s. It's okay having a few of them on each team, but it's not good having a full team of them against you, because there's not really a lot you can do. It's much better to limit them. Now, obviously, this system, it may increase matchmaking, like the time that you have to wait for a match, depending on what people have crewed up, because there is obviously people who drive certain vehicles because they are better, because this is an online game and that's what people do. There's a reason why in Modern Warfare 2, Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2, the last COD I played, that a lot of people use the Scar H, and a lot of people use the the intervention sniper and stuff like that, because, well, it was just a better weapon, or it was at least easier to use. And with War Thunder, there is always going to be a bias between which vehicles are better, because in real life they were, if they were working at maximum capacity, if they were working without any issues, and if they were working from a point of 100% efficiency, which is basically what you have to take in War Thunder. That's what these vehicles are at. Now, I don't think they should be, but they are, and you have to take that at face value. So, I think the next step, after implementing this idea through all of the BRs, which I think should definitely be done, even though it will increase matchmaking time, me personally, I don't mind that. If I get a fairer game, which doesn't basically match me and a bunch of 76 Shermans at whatever BR they're at now, like 5.3 or 5.0 even, against a team of Tiger 1s and Panthers, then I'm happy. And that's how it will be. Now, a good mediator, I think, would be, if there was more players playing this game, this wouldn't even be a problem. You could basically just implement the system that World of Tanks has. And maybe, at some point, there will be enough players. And then you could just implement that system, and matchmaking will be done in 10 seconds. But right now, that's obviously not what they're working with. But for me, the perfect system would be something like where the majority, let's take a BR spread of 6.0 to 6.7. So you say the majority of your team is at 6.3, and then you have a few outliers at 6.7 and 6.0. So at 6.3, let's say you have 6 tanks, 6.7 you have 2, and then 6.0 you have 2, or even at 5.7 you have 2. So basically, there are tactics that work in that scenario. And obviously, the lower the player, such as the lower the BR of the tank that the player is using, the more skilled the player is. Now, there was a rumor, which was kind of shown to be true, at least a few months ago, I'm not sure if it's still around, where basically, if you were in the top echelon of players, especially in aircraft, your BR was being bumped up. So if you were in a 5.0 aircraft, it used to be the BR spread was 1.3, and then they dropped it to 1.0. If you're in a 5.0 aircraft, technically you can only face stuff which is 6.0. But these high echelon of players, they get bumped up to stuff like 1.3 status again, so they're at 6.3. So they can face stuff which is at 6.3. So those players in tanks and aircraft, you're looking for to be the players who are at the lower BR to basically be able to use the tank and their experience in their hands to deal with these big boys. Now, there are certain tanks out there which just physically can't deal with them, but that is another issue for another time which needs to be discussed. Something that I think is being massively overlooked, especially in air combat, and, well, ground forces is not, I suppose in ground forces it's a big issue as well when it comes to ammunition, is that I still firmly believe that a stock aircraft or vehicle, let's say vehicle, is much worse than a fully upgraded one. And let's say with tanks, the biggest stuff you're looking at is maybe the engine upgrade, getting up hills and just moving around the map. Parts is always a big one. And ammunition. The Pershing is a completely different vehicle once you get that APCR. It's still not a brilliant vehicle, but at least it can pen the front of Tiger 2s, or at least the lower Tiger 2s, and doesn't have to try and get around the side. It can actually man up with its gun and try and take them on. A lot of jets, which will be affected by this, are massively different, just completely different, when they're stock and when they're fully upgraded. And I think the biggest with jets, because of the grinding you have to do to try and get these parts. But with the jets, I think it's a much bigger issue than it is with the tanks. Basically, because just take take one of your fully upgraded jets, if you have one, and I hope you do, because they are, for me personally, they are quite fun to fly, even though I definitely prefer prop planes. And just look at the stats of it, take it out for a spin, maybe in a test flight, and then take off all of the upgrades, and then try and fly it again, and see the difference. There is a massive difference with jets when it comes to it, and I wish that maybe you make a distinction, like once you unlock all of the tier 3 upgrades on a plane, or the modifications, then maybe you get bumped up by 0.3 BR. I think that should be a thing, and definitely in jets. Because then all the 8.0 jets which struggle when they're stock but are amazing when they are fully upgraded or even half upgraded, you could give them a bit of leeway. You put them at 7.7, so at least they face some of the lower stuff. And then, once they get some of the upgrades, you bump them up to 8.0, so then they know the vehicle, they know how the aircraft works, and then with the experience they have and the upgrades, they are combat effective, instead of getting thrown into a match where you have no experience with the aircraft, you have no upgrades, and you are facing people who have them. And this is with tanks, this is mainly with jets though. And it is a terrifying experience for any player. Because sometimes you feel completely powerless because you face people who've had 100 games in a certain plane. And they're fully upgraded, they have better ammunition, better engines by far, the fuel injection is up the wazoo, they know how to control their plane, and you're just sat there going, what the hell can I do against this person? And there are situations that you get like that. Even though I think aircraft is much better for outclassing an opponent than in tanks, there is still a lot of situations where that happens. So even though this is a nice change with the quantitative restrictions, I really like it. I think it's a step in the right direction, which hopefully will be expanded upon later on. And maybe this is the big change they were talking about when they brought out that Devblog saying, hey, we understand that you have issues with the matchmaking system, so we're going to change it. And I hope this is the first step. But we cannot overlook, when it comes to BRs and comes to matchmaking, how different one aircraft is when it is stock to when it is fully upgraded. And I think that needs to be addressed. Another thing that needs to be addressed is the number of vehicles on each team. So I don't mind if let's say the aircraft is higher BR than me, or even tanks. Let's say I'm at 6.0, I'm facing a bunch of 6.7s. That's fine. Now, in this new matchmaking system, that can technically still happen, if there are not enough people to fill the void. Or if a bunch of 8.0 vehicles turn up and they're coming to spoil your parties. Or you're at 4.0 and you're facing a bunch of 5.3s or 5.0s. Mainly 5.0s. So in the part, which this doesn't affect, because it only affects, as I said, higher ranks of vehicles right now. So, with that said, I think balancing by numbers is something you can do. I really do. You could say something like, for every 2 mediums, you can have a heavy. So for every 2 76 Shermans, you get a Tiger. For every 2 Pershings, which can be classed as a medium compared to a Tiger 2, you get 2 Pershings, 1 Tiger 2, or 1 IS-2, or 1 IS-3, you know? That's how it could work. I think it has to be an avenue that is explored. Because right now, I think it's being massively overlooked, and a lot of games do it like that. You have a team which is thoroughly more experienced, and the other team, they have more players, but they're a bit less experienced. Maybe you can do it by player efficiency. Maybe you see a lot of people in matchmaking who are winning games, maybe because they're squadding up, but they're still winning a good percentage of their games. They're getting a lot of kills and not many deaths. Maybe you target them and say, right, you're going to be on a team with less people. Or, in this new system, you're going to be the tank with the lowest BR. Obviously, if they're at 8.0 or 7.7, then it's quite hard to do. But if they're... that's when you start balancing by numbers. 8.0 is a tricky one, but at 7.7 you definitely can. And even though this devblog is kind of balancing by numbers with the whole you can only have so many top tier vehicles compared to the rest of the team on both sides, so in that way it's balanced. I still think teams, just whole goddamn teams, could be balanced by numbers, and just how efficient each vehicle is, which is why if you were able to balance by numbers or do something like that, you could have something like props against jets, or Tiger 2s against a bunch of Pershings, and it would be fun and it would be fair. But it is quite hard to balance, because you'd have to do it on player efficiency. You would have to work out how much a Tiger 2 can take. So let's see if it's like, right, so at the moment a Tiger 2 is averaging 2.7 kills to each one that is killed. Now obviously that's a ridiculous number and probably completely wrong. But then the dev team will go, right, so that means 3 tanks to 1 Tiger 2. And then from there you'd have to balance it and shift it about, kind of like when the new matchmaking system was introduced. Because it wasn't like it is now. When it was first introduced, it was kind of all over the place. So, as we see incremental improvements. We see maybe 1 step backwards, 2 steps forwards, and that's what we want to see. And for me personally, there's not really many steps back when it comes to quantitative restrictions. Maybe some people will see it like that, but the only people I see hating this are the people who abuse the current system, or are at BR 8.0. The people who completely abuse the people who are trying to climb, such as people in their Pershings, even stuff like if you're trying to grind the Panthers, or let's say the T-34s. The only people who lose in this system were the people who were kind of destroying the game for a lot of people in the old system at higher tiers. And we'll see if it makes a difference. But I do think the other stuff has to be looked into. The idea of balancing by numbers, and also BR changes of a vehicle if it's stock or if it's fully upgraded. That's probably the massive one for me. But anyway, I'll catch you next time.